Today, I'm going to share my top 20 historical fiction books set in Asia. As some of you know, I've actually been living in Asia for the last 10 years. I'm from the UK, but I'm a teacher and I love to teach in different countries and, of course, read books about them. I've actually lived in both Thailand and the Maldives. Although I gotta tell you, it's very hard to find historical fiction books that are set in the Maldives. If you've got one, please comment it below. Maybe I'll be one of the first to write a historical fiction book set in the Maldives. Watch this space. And I've got a range of books from all over Asia as a continent. But of course, I haven't covered every single country here. So if you've got a book that you absolutely want to share, I would love to hear about it. Please drop it in the comments when we get to that section. I feel like there are so many historical fiction lovers out there, and I think it just goes so well with my channel, Books That Teach Us, because I really feel like we have so much to learn about historical fiction. You might have noticed there are some kittens running around. I'm currently fostering 3 kittens, Thunder, Storm, and Cloud, so they might make an appearance at various different points in the video as they've just woken up. Number 1, I'm going to start off with Thailand. Now, I've got a few contenders for Thailand for historical fiction, and I'm trying to read more Thai authors at the moment. So I am actually going to do a whole video on Thai authors later on. So subscribe if you're interested in watching that. But I'm going to start off with The Narrow Road to the Deep North by Richard Flanagan, who is not Thai, as you might be able to tell by his name. However, this book I felt was so moving because I don't know about you guys, but I'm from Europe, I'm British. And when we talk about World War II, it's very European central. We know that kind of the US joined in at one point, but we never really get taught about the colonies, about the British Empire, about all of that awful legacy and what that led to for people in those countries with World War II until I moved to Thailand. And there's an area in Thailand where they, of course, have the Death Railway. Now, some of you might not know about this, but Thailand was technically neutral in the war, but there were Japanese army that was here. And they had prisoners of war and they forced them, along with many, many Asian forced laborers, essentially slaves, to work on this death railway, because many, many of them died due to awful conditions that would ultimately link up Thailand and Burma. And that would kind of be the potential downfall of the British if they had managed to do that route. And that is the kind of background to this book. Some of it's set in Australia. And I actually looked up afterwards that the author's own dad, can't remember if it was dad or granddad. It was a soldier. He was one of the prisoners of war. And so I felt like that's maybe why it felt more meaningful than other books that I've read. And it was very cleverly done. I think it weaved in a lot of different storylines. So there was some kind of modern day parts that it would go to, and then it would be a lot of flashbacks to what happened in the prisoner of war camps on the Death Railway. The Bridge Over the River Kwai is one of the famous kind of films that came out of that era. And you can go there in Thailand. I've been there several times. You can actually take a train across the River Kwai. You can visit the Railway Museum. I actually took some students before to one of the cemeteries there. And there's a lot of good information in that area too about it. But I think this book just really brought it to life for me. I think, that's one of the reasons why I love historical fiction is you could really imagine all the different characters, the horrendous living conditions. And it felt really more meaningful to me because I thought, God, I've been there. I've walked those routes. And it actually made me feel quite emotional because it suddenly really connected that history with the idea of even the fictional characters being there. And I really urge anyone who's interested in Asia and World War II history to read it. I'm just going to kind of bounce around Asia, but I am going to go next door for this one to Malaysia. I've actually got 2 books for Malaysia because I love them so much. So my first one is The Gift of Rain by Tan Tuan Han. And I just absolutely love this book. It is all set on the island of Penang, which I have visited many times. It's a beautiful island, really fascinating place to visit. And again, this is set before World War II begins. And it's all about a young Anglo-Malay. So he has one parent who is white British and one parent who is from Penang, from the area. And it's all about living on the island to begin with. This is pre-war. And then he meets someone who he looks up to, and then becomes his idol, and that is a Japanese man. And they have this ongoing friendship, and then they find themselves on opposite sides during World War II. And I think it also showed a little bit of the Japanese perspective. There was a lot about how it was for the people of Penang, evacuations that were happening, a lot of bombing. You can actually go to the fort at Penang as well, and just kind of the fear of what was going on, informants, who was working with who. It's a really fascinating read. I absolutely love the title as well, The Gift of Rain. I just thought this is one of the best book titles I've ever heard. And I definitely recommend reading this book for Malaysia, again, for World War II history set in Asia. I feel like you can't talk about Asian historical fiction without mentioning Amitav Ghosh. This one I actually have on my shelves. It is The Glass Palace. This actually spans three Asian countries. So I think that can tick a few off our list. So it covers Burma, India, and what was then known as Malaya. And Amitav is just one of the best writers, I think, really around at the moment. And so it all follows like one family. It covers various different characters who are all interconnected with that family. And that's why it's spread out across such a wide range of countries and where they travel between. And I learned quite a bit about like the timber industry in this one and how important it was. And then it became the rubber industry and people chasing that kind of gold rush of things that were happening in Asia at the time. It does then go into World War II. It starts off in Mandalay, where the royal family who live in the Glass Palace basically get forcibly removed by the British. So there's quite a lot of learnings there about British colonization, things that I did not know about before. And so I just think it's amazing. I would say that sometimes the characters, kind of all the intertwining is a little bit complex. So I would say it's a book that you kind of need to read consistently to manage to keep up with all the different characters in it. The next book on my list, I'm going to jump across to China. Now, this is not technically historical fiction, but it reads like it. So I hope you'll forgive me and you let me get away with it. It is Wild Swans by Jung Chang. So the author actually wrote this based on her own family members. So it starts off with her great grandmother, who was a concubine of one of the emperors of China. And it's basically over the last 100 years of Chinese history as told by following her family. Now, it is all the events in it, I believe, are true, and they're from talking to her family and understanding history at the time. But it is so absolutely beautifully told. They do read like fictional characters, and she has brought this whole story to life on the page. And it just explains so much about Chinese history that I really felt like I had to explain it here, because there were so many moments for me where I thought, oh my gosh, wow, that is why things are like that. Oh, that is why Chinese culture has that element in. And it just really was eye-opening. There were some really, really sad parts about, obviously, Mao and communist China, and how people were literally expected to like throw their families under a bus in order to get ahead with the party. And the party was more important than your own children, than your own family, than your parents. Like, is shocking, I think, to us who did not live it, and just really heartbreaking. I had a lot of nightmares while I was reading this book, I'm not going to lie. One of the sweetest parts of the book that I read is where there's a couple who move into the building where I think she's living as a little girl and her parents are there as members of the Communist Party. And this couple just seems so like wrapped up in each other, and they're so in love and have this kind, loving relationship. And it's the first time that the author has seen that and realized, oh my gosh, when people are happy, they don't go around trying to snitch on their neighbors and get other people in trouble. And it's just this moment of realization of like what unhappy people have been driven to do by the situation, and how the rebellion is to almost try and be happy despite that, like this couple that she meets with the neighbors. And I thought that was just a really beautiful moment. I actually remember writing, like, underline. So yeah, while obviously there's some really depressing, heart-wrenching parts to it, it's just, yeah, I would say it's just very awe-inspiring. We are going to bounce now to Vietnam. Going to go down the map that way. And I've got two books set in Vietnam. So one of them, I'm sorry, I'm really going to butcher the Vietnamese name, is Win Pan Kieu Mai. And it is a book called The Mountains Sing. It's a really eye-opening portrayal, once again, that follows one family, a fictional family, although I believe the author, she drew on real people's accounts for parts of this. It follows particularly like the matriarch, the grandmother, all through the Civil War. There are parts where one character is fighting in one army and one goes off in another, and what is ethical and what is right. And at the heart, just kind of this family trying to survive and keep that family bond going despite the absolute chaos that is happening around them. My next Vietnamese recommendation is actually written by a journalist called Anthony Gray, and his book is called Saigon. It's a really, really fat book, and I think it does a fantastic job of, once again, having this central couple of families, and some of them interweave, obviously, in the story, and telling like this big, all-encompassing history of Vietnam in more recent history, starting off with when the French were there, because I think when lots of us think about Vietnam, we think about the Americans being there and then what led to the Civil War. Well, actually, the French were the instigators of that. And so it talks about, you know, these connections at the time, and then the country starting to splinter, the American government starting to get involved, and about obviously the divide between the North and the South of Vietnam. Ho Chi Minh himself is actually a character that appears at one point in this book as one of the characters meets him. And I just feel like it was one of the best ways for me to learn about recent Vietnamese history. And it just really worked. I felt very drawn in by the characters. So you want to know what happens. There's obviously big things that happen over the course of the war. And I think he does a really good job of, because of all the characters weaving together. And some of them you think, oh, that tale has gone cold with that character, but then he brings it back in again. And it just works really, really well. Okay, I've kind of bounced back over now to Burma or Myanmar. And again, I'm cheating a little bit here because, a little bit like Wild Swans, this book is by Charmaine Craig and it is called Miss Burma. And again, it is the tale of her parents, her grandparents and her mother. However, I do believe she weaved in a few more additional characters into it. So I'm counting it as part of this one. This book, I have to say, I felt very ignorant as I was reading this book because I thought, I know none of this stuff. And it was absolutely eye-opening. So in terms of what I learned about the history, I learned a lot about the different factions and tribal communities within Burma. And I had no idea that kind of the Burmans, so it's one community, made up 50% of the population. But the other 50% were all these different groups that had never really got on, that the British put together when they colonized it, and then did that very British thing where they start to favor one group over another, and they create all this tension and that divide and conquer idea that the British Empire was so good at. And there was lots of mention of the Karens, the Karen tribe. And it's called Miss Burma because actually there was a beauty pageant that her mother took part in. That, I don't want to spoil anything. It happened and it all was just very bizarre in the middle of this huge civil war almost that was happening at the time. And people thinking, well, we shouldn't be fighting each other. We should be fighting off the British because they are the colonizers. And it was just really shocking. I think one of the main bits as well was talking about the geography of the country, where there's so many mountains and people were kind of fading back into the jungle to try and escape violence that was happening to them from other factions, from the British. It was really just so well told as a historical fiction book, but yeah, just all the history was real. And yeah, if you've read it, let me know below, because I don't hear many people talking about this book, and I think it should be talked about more. Okay, number 8. I might have mentioned this one before on my channel because we're going into books about India. Some of you might know I have a huge playlist of books about India. I'll link it at the end. And this is The Far Pavilions by MNK. I have read this book so many times, and I just think it's this wonderful historical fiction book that brings to life India, makes me want to go there. MMK was actually one of the products of British colonization in India. So she is white British, but grew up in India and has a big love for it. So a lot of her books are set there. And this book goes back in time and imagines being in the 1800s, I believe. And it all follows one central character, Ash, who actually grows up thinking he's Indian, because when his father dies, he's adopted by a local woman who takes him in, and they go and work in the Hawa Mahal, which is this amazing palace in India. And I actually got to see it with my own eyes once, and I felt super excited because I'd read the book and it was set there. Not that it's a super happy section of the book. But anyway, it talks a lot about all of these crazy things that happen inside the palace with the different royal families, people trying to poison each other, trying to escape all that. Then Ash at one point gets shipped back to England because it's revealed to him that his heritage is actually British, and he gets sent there and he doesn't enjoy it there at all. There's this really sad bit where they're trying to force him to eat beef, and he's never eaten beef before because he grew up believing or being Hindu, and he just can't wait to get back to India. But as a British person, the main way to get to India is to join the bar and the British Army. So he goes back to India as a soldier and then starts to realize all these things about British colonization. It drops from him realizing like what the British are doing there. And there's this love story with a princess that happens, which is just really beautiful, but lots and lots of tension. I learned a lot, sadly, about the sati practice, which is really heartbreaking, which happened a long time ago in India, where if a Maharaja died, his wives, and they were often plural, were expected to burn with him on the funeral pyre and burn themselves alive. And there's a section in the book, no spoilers, but basically they're meant to put their hands in paint and they put them on this wall and go off to be burnt alive. And people thought this was a fantastic thing because they would become saintly if they saw this. So it was really quite this gladiator thing that brought people out to watch. And when I was in India, I actually saw on one of the palace walls all these little handprints, and they were so small, the handprints, and you just think, oh my gosh, these are basically murdered women. So yeah, that was very shocking and eye-opening to that practice that used to happen there. They then move into what became one of the Indian mutinies, so where the British employed a lot of Indians to fight for them, which all seems very weird now because we are post-colonization. But at the time, they were called the sepoys. And one of the main things that triggered it was that they had used pork fat to grease the bullets. I don't know much about guns. It's not my area of expertise. But basically, it insulted everybody. It insulted the Muslims because you would have to actually put that in your mouth. It insulted Hindus who were vegetarian. It insulted people who only would kind of eat specially blessed meat. And that was kind of supposedly, I'm sure there's obviously a lot more to it, but that was one of the triggers. Then it then kicked off what is one of the wars of independence of Indians trying to get out from under colonial rule. It then almost turns into a totally different book. I would say the whole latter third, where it takes place in Afghanistan. So I'm ticking off one of our other countries here. And it becomes, I believe, the second war that the British get involved in Afghanistan. And it's really quite eye-opening about that, a lot about the mountain ranges, about kind of the warrior warfare and how people would fight because of these huge, massive hills, I believe the Kush Mountains. That's one of the ones that takes place in the book. And it's just kind of like this big overarching thing in northern India and into Afghanistan. So it really kind of encompasses a lot of things in the region. And then at the heart of it, there's this romance, the love story that runs through it, which I'm going to spoilers about. And yeah, I love it. If you've read it, let me know what you think. I've read a couple of other of her books, but I think this is my absolute favorite. One more book for India. I don't think I snuck on an extra one at the end, but I might have done. I'm going to go for A Covenant of Water by Abraham Verghese. This book, again, big, chunky book. And again, it just encompassed like so many different things. So it's all set in Kerala, in the south of India. And it talks a lot about the waterways, and it kind of follows one family, and then again, the kind of people interconnected with them. There's other bits where it jumps somewhere else, and then you're trying to think, oh, how are these characters going to end up kind of connected in the same scene? So that kind of builds some tension and keeps it quite interesting. There's quite a lot. I feel like I learned quite a lot about leprosy in it, because one of the characters is a surgeon who then decides to try and help out lepers and not cure them, sorry, but to help them out with surgery and try and improve what they can do. So that was really interesting, kind of quite a lot of scientific information there that I didn't know. Then even weaves together some mentions of like the Communist Party later on in the book. But at heart, it's about one family, particularly the girl who marries into this family, and you start it off reading, you think, oh God, is it going to be one of these books where it's like a teenager and a really old man and there's awful things? But there are a lot of awful things later on. But actually the central love story is heartwarming. And I found that quite refreshing, considering some of the books I've read before, like Girls Burn Brighter, that broke me. There are some really horrendous parts in this, including one childbirth scene, which is just so graphic. Yeah, if you're about to have a baby or think about having one soon, don't read this book at that point. I think leave it a little bit. Yeah, it does a really good job of like describing all of the waterways in Kerala, and there's some almost magical realism moments of a presence, a spirit in the house, and there's an elephant that's around. So it just covers so many different things. It's really enjoyable, and a lot to learn from it as well. Bouncing to Sri Lanka. I've also got a long list of books about Sri Lanka, but I think I've got 3 on this list, if you'll forgive me. So the first one was just such a quirky book. It is called The 7 Moons of Mali Almeida by Shehan Karunatilaka, if I've said that correctly. And it is from the point of view of someone who has died. So he's basically a ghost. And stay with me, because there's a lot to learn historical fiction wise in it. And it is very fictional, fantasy fiction, where basically Mali is himself and he's in this afterlife, but he has moments where he can go back and see people, can't interact with them, but he can see people from his life, and he's trying to put together what happened to him because he's forgotten how he died. And that is the ongoing journey of him to try and pass into the next journey of his afterlife, is that he needs to uncover some things. And as he's on this crazy weird journey, uncovering things from the afterlife by watching the living and bouncing around Sri Lanka, we start to learn about Sri Lanka. Obviously, lots of mentions about the civil war, about different factions there. The CIA take part in it as well, and about political meetings that he is able to see now that he's dead and have more of an understanding of that. What different kind of NGO groups are doing during the civil war as well. It's just really quirky, because I think I don't read many books that are kind of set in the afterlife. And I also learned quite a lot about Buddhism there. So he's a character who is a Sri Lankan Buddhist. And so lots of things kind of link in with Buddhist ideologies. Yeah, very quirky. Let me know if you enjoyed it. Okay, my next one is Mosquito by Roma Tern. I think she's a fantastic writer. I've read loads of her books, so much so that I had to double check I haven't merged some of them together, which I don't think I've done. And so this book essentially is a love story between two people and who are then divided by what happens during the Civil War as it's encroaching upon them in Sri Lanka. I've learned a lot about the violence of the times, about the kidnapping, the fears. I think it really makes you, because you're rooting for the two characters to be together, Millie, it really makes you root for them and creates that tension of hoping they're going to be okay. And I'm not going to any spoilers. And I really loved it, like all of her writing as well. Okay, I've got one more that I think counts as historical fiction, but I feel like it has some modern day parts as well. It's Chai Time in Cinnamon Gardens by Shakari Chandran. Now, actually, most of this is set in Australia, but it is a Sri Lankan family who have emigrated to Australia. So, really, at its heart, there's a lot about Sri Lanka and about the Civil War and about characters and how they kind of come from that, flashbacks to that, how they're traumatized by that. There's also quite a lot about like modern day racism and how they're treated in Australia. So that was quite sad and an eye-opening as well. So yeah, okay, maybe it's not like full history there, but I think it's an amazing book. I actually read it when I was in Australia, thinking it would be more set in Australia. But actually I learned quite a lot about Sri Lanka from it. So yeah, put that one on your list. My next one is The Island of Sea Women by Lisa C. This is all set in South Korea on the island of Jeju. There's parts of the book, so it kind of starts off in more modern day and then it goes back in time. And it's really about the story of friendship, of female bonds and friendship, and how they are tested over time by horrific incidences that happen. I absolutely love the ocean. So this is all set, but with women who are free divers and they free dive down to get sea cucumbers. So that's the setting for this story, is on this island. And obviously I love all the references to the ocean and everything like that. And then the kind of the peaceful life gets taken over by the Japanese occupation that then comes in. One of the characters is a Korean family collaborate with the Japanese. So then you've got a lot about kind of the ethical, moral side of things, about kind of people being very divided by what was happening, whether they were doing that for profit or for their own survival and safety of their family. Just lots of like big questions about that. But ultimately, we love a story about female friendship. And that is definitely one of these. And obviously all of the ocean references as well. There are a lot of quite horrific things that happen in this novel, just as a bit of a trigger warning as well. Obviously it is about like occupying forces and violence. Okay, so the next one, I've gone for a book that maybe not many of you have heard of because it's actually a young adult book. It is a book called Iqbal by an Italian writer, Francesco D'Adamo. And I really like this book because I think it says a lot about kind of bonded labor and slavery in kind of more modern day Pakistan. So it kind of speaks to very modern history, and it is about children who have either been sold or kind of forced to be taken in because their families are so poor and living in such poverty, and they are forced to work in child labor conditions to weave carpets. And this is a big sign. If you're ever thinking of buying a fancy rug, make sure that the labor laws are strong in the country where you are getting it from, because this is a whole expose on what they call the carpet mafia and all of this exploitation of children that is happening so that the rich people can get rich. And no one cares about the children that are being exploited and living in awful conditions. And it's Actually, again, a little bit, it's fictional characters, except for one character, Iqbal, who was a real person, who was a boy who managed to escape from slavery in one of these carpet child labor environments and get to safety and start to alert the world to what was actually happening. It's all told of point of view of a fictional character in the book, but he is very much a real person. We actually read this at school with some students, and I think if they were really moved by this book, and I always think that's a win. If you can move 11, 12-year-olds, then that's a really good book. You're going to need tissues for this book. It's a sad one, just as a heads up. Okay, number 15. This is very light and fluffy compared with the last one. It is The 40 Rules of Love by Elif Shafak. You guys probably know I love her already. I think I've got one more book to read, and then I'm going to do a whole playlist on Elif Shafak books, because I've got so many at this point. And I'm cheating with this one because there are parts of this that are set in Persia. So I believe it hits many countries in Asia. It's a story that has 2 time zones. It's all my favorites. So we jump from more modern day, bored, housewife, stuck at home, unhappy in her marriage, and strikes up a relationship with a man who is writing about Rumi and Shams. So for those of you who might not know, Rumi is a poet. You might have seen some of his poetry around, kind of, there's a lot of it on Pinterest and things nowadays, but he is one of kind of the world's most beautiful writers that ever existed. And his friendship with Shams, who was a whirling dervish, who I started to research when I went to Turkey a couple of years ago. And there's a whole group of kind of different interpretations of Islam and what the Quran really means. And I feel like I learned quite a lot about that one particular group of Muslims and what they believe to be true and to be right. And I just loved, like, it was like this adventure story of happening between Rumi and Shams and their friendship and what was going on in the 12th century, contrasted with like modern day or generic things. And I just really loved it. I felt like it's quite different from Elif Shafak's other books. And it's definitely much like lighter hearted and quite needed. So yeah, you want a lovely book like that, then I'd go for 40 Rules of Love. Okay, my next one, I have gone to Iran, and it is The Stationery Shop of Tehran by Marjan Kamali. This is, at heart, a love story where people end up on opposite sides and separated by the unrest that was happening in the Iranian Revolution. And I feel like I feel like there's a lot to learn, but this was maybe like little snippets of it told kind of through a love story. Hey. So I think I maybe would have liked a little bit more of the history to come through, but I still felt like there was quite a lot of learning, like family divisions, people taking different sides of things. It takes place in, well, the main event is 1953, which is the Iranian coup that happened. This one contrasts really nicely with like the stationery shop of Tehran, and it is called The House of the Mosque by Kader Abdullah. And it really all follows a central family among the similar time with the Iranian Revolution and westernization of Iran. And I found this book really fascinating because it was from the point of the more conservative people in it. And as mentioned, it's called The House of the Mosque. So they are connected with the mosque. They work in the mosque and have quite traditional ideas, and they are very threatened and concerned by the changes that are happening in their country. And then obviously within the fact, there's then more kind of division of changes as some people go more conservative, some people go more liberal. There's this real like understanding of what it is when we bring about huge change in a country and how it really alienates people. And I think that's what I learned most from this book. Yeah, I think I learned a lot about like the kind of the divide and the political tensions and the government and the the imams and the religious leaders and how there was tension there. It's not like everybody agreed on certain decisions. So yeah, I just feel like there was quite a lot of learning in this book. And I love it because I just found it randomly in the library one day while I was browsing and thought that looked interesting. And so I love that way to find books too. Okay, this one I have the absolutely soul-wrenching Beekeeper of Aleppo by Christy Lefty. It is the horrific story of a Syrian couple who are fleeing the war in Syria, hence the historical parts of it. And it's about their journey of trying to escape, trying to get to freedom, trying to get stable, and how the trauma of the past and everything that happened then, it's some really quite horrific. This book comes with some trigger warnings, keeps catching up with them in modern day. I read this when I was in a 2-week hotel quarantine and couldn't see or speak to another person face to face, which maybe wasn't the greatest idea because it was really heartbreaking. And I just remember crying in the bath at it. So just a heads up about that one. But it's really moving, very beautifully written, but definitely a tearjerker. I feel like things about refugees hit me quite hard because I do quite a lot of work with the refugee community where I am. And it's just really kind of makes you realize the extent of trauma that people have gone through. All right, we're getting there. I've got 2 more books and then something exciting to mention at the end as well. The next one is When the Apricots Bloom by Gina Wilkinson. And this book, I wasn't sure about it at first because I thought, I don't know, it seems like it's a white woman writing about Iraq. However, she actually lived there and she wrote this book based on her almost friendship with another woman then. So this is written in Saddam Hussein in Iraq. And it's basically like Gina Wilkinson's way of exploring how this other woman saw her and to try and find understanding of the things that happened. So basically it was a police state where people were paid and threatened to report on their neighbors, to report on foreigners in particular, in order to protect their families, to report on what was really happening and what was going on the ground. And this actually happened to Gina Wilkinson herself. She had a woman befriend her and then kind of realized that there was a bit of a betrayal there and that someone was actually spying on her. However, this book exploration of it, which obviously lots of it's fictionalized too, is one chapter is told from the foreign journalist and one chapter is told from the Iraqi woman who is kind of being forced to spy on those around her and hold her family together, stop all this kind of like unrest and tension from taking hold of her own family, including her sons. And it was really good. I really enjoyed it. I think I raced through this book. I love it when chapters are told from 2 different characters' perspectives and how that kind of pans out and the understandings and the misunderstandings that happen there as well. And I think I learned quite a lot about what it must have been like to live in that kind of regime. Okay, my last one. I did bounce back to India again, but this kind of encompasses, I feel like, India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. It is Midnight's Children by Salman Rushdie. So this is a book about a series of children who are all born at midnight, and it is the day when India gets independence from Britain. So it's a joyous occasion, and all these children are born, and actually they can telepathically talk to each other because of the special moment of when they were born at the moment of India being born as well. However, it then goes into, in the background, all of these things that are happening with Pakistan, with kind of what happens there was East Pakistan and West Pakistan, which then all changed and then became Bangladesh. So it really kind of encompasses the geography of all of that area too. And it's definitely like quirky because of the telepathic thing and the children being able to hear each other's thoughts. But I think it's really, really good historical fiction for teaching you about what happens at that time. and brings it kind of more up to modern day. Lots of references to different political parties that were going on at the time, which definitely is confusing. And so I think don't expect to understand everything from this book, but I think it gives a flavor of the region and the history there. So the one exciting thing I wanted to tell you was about my book globe. I'm going to link to it at the end. It's this amazing spinning interactive globe where you can click on different countries, including all the ones I mentioned just now. And it will share the books that I've read from that country that I recommend for you. And there are links to more videos within my book globe too. Happy reading.